I'm interested in the that alliance between the left and aesthetics and theater people and left-wing politics. There was just an obituary in yesterday's New York Times for Corin Redgrave, and much speculation about what his career might have been had he been a little less political, that he perhaps politically acted his way out of several really good gigs that his sisters, Vanessa and Lynn, had managed to get, but somehow he just couldn't make the leap. Do you see Trojan Barbie as a political act?
Yes, I do, but I want to qualify that because I guess it's about. I want to qualify it in the sense that I think often people take the term political theatre to mean theatre that has a message, and where the content and the message drives everything else about the play. And that's, I think for me, Trojan Barbie is my attempt to wrestle with what seem to me to be intractable political questions. So I'm hoping that it will be something that will take the audience into a dream and a question, it does ask the question of our own relationship as Westerners to the traumas and wars of other people. That's not a new question. That is really a Euripidean question. But I hope that it asks the question rather than provides an answer. So it is political in the sense that it engages with political questions, but it's not political theatre in the sense of a piece that's meant to convey a message or convert people's opinions.
It doesn't provide the answer.
No.
It just poses the question.
No. And I think people always come in with their own answers to theatre. They don't always come in with their own questions.
Well, maybe that's a good segue to asking for some questions from this audience. I am sure there are some. Just to clue you in, my own students are going to have to locate your play in the great modern tradition. So they may have, and they're rolling their eyes as I say that, they may have some questions that they want to get straight from the source. And others, I'm sure, will have some questions. Do we have some questions?
For you, is Helen of Troy to the Greeks as Barbie is to some contemporary American audiences?
Oh, what an interesting question. I think in some ways in that she's infinitely malleable as a figure, So a very recognisable icon immediately that is this sort of impossible idea of womanhood, but also someone who is usable for so many different, or can be interpreted in so many different ways, which I think, the Hollywood stars of the 40s and 50s were in a way that as well, like these glowing blank screens for the projection of fantasy. One of the stories I most love about Helen of Troy is that Euripides wrote another play called Helen, in which Helen was this totally virtuous figure who lived on an island, who'd been kidnapped and sent to an island, and her wicked twin was the one who went to Troy and wrecked everything. Her wicked clone twin. I mean, this is Euripides,
Evil twin.
So I love the fact that the more mythic a figure is, the more different versions there are in a way. Yeah.
Where did you first get your Euripides? Did you read classics as a young scholar?
I was forced to when I got the job of adapting Trojan Women. So
really?
That was it. But then I was very lucky because at that time I was at Brown and I set up doing my PhD, I think, at that stage. And I was very fortunate in that I was able to set up an independent study for a semester with the Professor of Classics there, David Constan, who is a really wonderful man. And our study just consisted of reading right through Euripides and then just chatting about it. Yeah, and he was just, the depth of his knowledge about Euripides was so great. And I was writing the play at the same time. And one of the things that he really pushed me to think about during that experience, well, two things. One is the way that the Greeks rewrote every single story. So, we tend to think of Helen as one figure or Hecuba as one figure. And in fact, they're written in so many different ways in so many different stories. There's another play by Euripides called Hecuba, where she turns into a dog and climbs up the mast of a boat. Her eyes spout fire and she howls. She turns into this giant dog and climbs up the mast of a ship, which I've put in Hecuba's last speech as what happens to her. But you know, so that was my sort of crash course, really. Yeah, and you know, one of the things that I really credit Professor Constant with is that he really pushed me to think about the foreignness of the Greek texts, not the easy accessibility, but in particular the fact that the Greek structures of feeling are not the same as our contemporary ones, you know, and I mean, the kind of easy truism is that, oh, we're all the same underneath, and that, you know, feelings are eternal and they translate, and in fact they can be very culturally bound. And he really pushed me to think about what honour meant for the Greeks and what love meant, and that they didn't necessarily come out the same, you know. So in my play, part of the comedy of the play, I think, is the fact that Helen doesn't understand that structure of feeling that informs the moaning and the wailing and the honour before life and the need to get the dead bodies back and bury them. You know, that
she's just looking for Tylenol, right?
Yeah. And there's also a contempt for tradition in a structure of feeling that's about moving on and optimism and the present and what's next. And it's somehow shameful to think about the past or to contemplate failure and loss.
Yeah. Oh, fascinating. Other questions? Yes.
We've heard you talk about the women in the play. Could you talk a little bit about your vision for the individual men in your army and what you wanted to convey with that?
Yes. So I guess I'll start with Jorge and Max, because those parts of the play are quite different than the rest in a way. And I guess that's the play that I guess is closest to the contemporary American experience, you know. And I wanted Jorge and Max to be pretty close to people who might be in the US Army today, you know, or their correlates from another country, but they're pretty American in tone. And I was just trying to think about the demographics of the army now, and to find people who would be that. And so they're the closest to a sort of realism in the play, I guess. And I wanted them to be different kinds of guys. You know, that Jorge is sort of more thoughtful and has more going on internally, and Max wants a good time. But in fact, neither of them are wholly good or wholly bad. They're just people in a situation. And then Micah is a little bit more kind of convoluted in this play, and I sort of wanted Micah to have a feeling of being a contemporary American soldier, but also to be the eternal soldier. So for me, there's a sort of echo of Hercules about him, that the poor guy has been in a war eternally, just eternally, you know. So he has that line about somehow you know, they put you in sealed planes and tell you you're travelling, but somehow you always end up in Troy. And one of the things that was in my heart when I was thinking about Micah was about the constant redeployment of soldiers in this country into war after war at the moment, and how ruinous that is for those people. You know, how wrong it is for people to just have to go back and back and back, and in a way what that does to your sense of time and place, you know. So
back to the cycles again.
Yeah, back to the cycles again. So I wanted these guys to be soldiers, but I wanted them to be really different soldiers from each other and have a different feeling about them. And then Talthybius is my other kind of figure, and with him I was really thinking about the kind of African generals and the kind of people who have to put on nice clothes and uniforms and go and be spokespeople for other people's wars. You know, I was thinking about Kofi Annan and the UN and those very dignified African gentlemen who are maybe watching their country being absolutely carved into ruins, and they still have to go and dress up and speak diplomatically. So they were some of the images and beginnings for me about those men. And I guess also we know from the Euripides, and we know from the way that women are written about, that women are so often victims of circumstance, and you know how tiresome that is to just always think of women as victims. But there's a victimhood to the role of soldier too. You know, that there's a sort of machinery of oppression that these guys are really caught up in as well. And that the stuff about being in the zoo comes from a newspaper clipping. There actually was a break-in to the Baghdad Zoo by American soldiers with a bunch of beer and a party that went wrong, and they killed the tiger, and that just completely broke my heart and also seemed, in a Brechtian way, iconic of the whole situation.
Yeah, I at first wondered if that hadn't been real, and then when I saw that it was, I thought, yes, the perfect little alienating device to make us stand apart and consider what the actions are. Yeah, brilliant.